Anyway, it's time for another preview video for the Jurassic Park card game. This one's going to be on Paddock Upgrades. Now, Paddock Upgrades, let's bring up the first one here, are a asset, like the employees we previously seen, but the twist with the Paddock Upgrade is they are applied and affect only a single paddock. So you basically assign a Paddock Upgrade to an existing paddock in your board, which consists of a species card and a Paddock Upgrade card. Now, I say they only affect a single paddock, but they can affect adjacent paddocks, or be affected by adjacent paddocks as well. Paddock upgrades always have an expense cost. Here we see the electrified fences from the original Jurassic Park, which have an expense cost of 0. It's a very basic paddock upgrade, and it just modifies security. We'll see other paddock upgrades with much more of an expense cost than this. Electrified fences is pretty simple. It's like the most basic paddock upgrade we'll see. And yeah, so paddock upgrades are played during your construction phase, which is when you play all your assets. You can build, per construction phase, you can build one thing, which is either a paddock upgrade or a facility, and then you hire any amount of employees. And these are currently marked as Chaos of 5, which is subject to change. With the deck restructuring in this version I've been showing here on the channel, it's required the addition of a new Chaos number, which is Chaos number 5. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this all before. And I've assigned paddock upgrades to that number, separating them off their previous allotment of the deck, because it makes sense to do it that way. In the new version, you'll have more paddock upgrades in your deck than you used to. Paddock upgrades are pretty neat, since they modify your paddocks. That their positioning on the board matters. They're much more exciting than facilities or employees, generally speaking. So having more paddock upgrades in your deck adds a lot to the game. So that's why I did it. Second one we got here, another OG Jurassic Park one, the Explorer Tour. This is a headliner paddock upgrade, which makes it pretty special. We can see the expense cost of setting up an Explorer Tour is much higher than it is to simply set up some electrified fences. And this is an example of a paddock upgrade where the adjacency effects matter. Here, to optimize your Explorer Tour, you want to have an herbivore and a carnivore in the adjacent paddocks. So it doesn't matter if you play the Explorer Tour on a paddock that contains an herbivore or a carnivore, but you want to make sure the adjacent paddocks have one of each. Otherwise, it just doesn't do anything. It's not even really optimizing, to be honest. It's the only way it works. But the reason the Explorer Tour is so particular is +3 income from a paddock upgrade is exceptional. And +1 fame is also really special. Of course, you need to exhibit fame to win the game. So having something like Explorer Tour here to increase your fame total without actually having to bring in an entire new dinosaur is very special. Generally, these fame increases are restricted to headliner cards, headliner paddock upgrades, and we saw flocking before in the action video, I believe, which also was a temporary fame increase. So the access to these fame increasers is pretty restricted. So you can't stack a bunch of them together. Next, we got High Hide from the Lost World, which is being treated as a paddock upgrade. Another example of adjacency effects here. So this is almost, in some senses, almost a worse version of the Explorer Tour, except it's much more flexible. Same cost, you don't get the fame bonus, but you do get this income bonus for adjacencies. And you don't have to have specific requirements in the adjacent paddocks. Just as long as the adjacent paddocks are occupied, the High Hide provides bonus income. Basically, because the person visiting this paddock in the park can also see the adjacent paddocks because they're up high in a hide. Another fairly basic paddock upgrade. A little bit more involved than the electrified fences, of course. This is kind of like a mid-tier involvement game effect here, kind of. Saying a lot of words without actually saying very much there, to be honest. Moving on. Treetop Gazers. This is another pretty basic paddock upgrade. This one is being drawn from Jurassic World concept art for one of the exhibits in Jurassic World. Thankfully, we've got a nice piece of concept art here to use for the card art, which is fantastic. Treetop Gazers probably gets bundled in with that electric fences as being a pretty simple paddock upgrade. In this case, it's a simple +1 income, but specifically only to a paddock that exhibits a sauropod. I think it's a pretty good card, all things considered. Simple, but simple doesn't mean weak. It's pretty good. The reason it's pretty good is Brachiosaurus is a sauropod and a starting species. So if you are playing Brachiosaurus as your starting species in your park, Treetop Gazers is never bad for you. You'll always have that sauropod target to apply this to get that bonus income. It's also very good with Brachiosaurus' effect and very good at the beginning of the game because its expense cost is merely 1, and it pays for itself after a single turn of being exhibited. But then it's just net profit after that. Solid card. Another fairly simple example, tapping into more stuff from Jurassic World, is the Aviary. Much like the previous example we saw, the Aviary requires a very particular type of species, in this case pterosaurs, and it provides, again, like +1 income, very analogous to the Treetop Gazers, but it also provides security bonus. So it's kind of like Treetop Gazers plus the electrified fences all in one, at an expense cost of 1, which sounds really great, right? You're getting a straight linear upgrade on the effective Treetop Gazers, except for a different species, and a straight linear upgrade on the fences. But since it's specifically pterosaurs, and there's no starting pterosaurs, it's actually a bit more niche. This also is balanced by the pterosaurs themselves, which generally have high security ratings, which makes the Aviary much more of a requirement in a sense. Like, if you want to really contain pterosaurs in your park, you're going to need security bonuses like the Aviary. So it's not as much of an upgrade as it might seem, right? If that makes sense, because you're already dealing with high security species. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, the way I said that, it makes sense in my head. It may just not make sense in the video. Finally, I think this is finally, yeah. Finally, we have Gyrosphere. Gyrosphere is kind of another simple to mid-tier paddock upgrade. It's kind of drawing off of those basic upgrades that are just really modulating your income in your park. The neat thing with Gyrosphere is you're able to move it. So while a 2 expense +1 income card is okay, it certainly is very flexible because it can target anything. The real special thing here is the Gyrosphere's capability to move to an adjacent paddock, which makes it really interesting as an early game upgrade, because if you, for instance, have a pterosaur in your park, and you play the Gyrosphere as the paddock upgrade on the pterosaur paddock, and then later you draw yourself an Aviary, well, you could simply move the Gyrosphere. The Gyrosphere can just slide on over to an adjacent exhibit, or adjacent paddock. Even if that paddock doesn't have a species in it, you can always create a new paddock with a paddock upgrade, as long as it's adjacent to an existing paddock. Which means that you can always, unless either paddock on either side of the Gyrosphere already has an upgrade, that's the only case where the Gyrosphere gets trapped. Otherwise, you could always move it, which allows you to kind of expand your park with some more expensive, more impactful upgrades, or more particular upgrades. You know, if you're building a deck that's got, say, Dimorphodon and Pteranodon, and you're running Aviaries, Gyrosphere might be a good counterpart to run with that, because it gives you another upgrade that you can put on your pterosaurs early game without losing out on the possibility of having an Aviary in that pterosaur paddock instead. Conversely, Gyrosphere is a bit less good, generally speaking, because 2 expense versus 1 is not a relevant early game, which is when these simple +1 income upgrades are most beneficial. It's being penalized for that flexibility a bit. But it certainly does have a role in certain builds that are very particular about what kind of upgrades they want, like the pterosaurs. So I don't think you would generally want to include Gyrosphere in every park build, but yeah, those certain kind of builds that have very particular other paddock upgrades, it works pretty well alongside them. You shouldn't think of Gyrosphere as the baseline, is what I'm saying. You shouldn't think of this as your basic income increaser. This is just kind of a good stopgap for really, really particular strategies. I've said that like 3 times over in this video for no good reason. You get the point. Yes. So this preview video, maybe a little bit shorter, but these Paddock upgrades are fairly self-explanatory. I'm working on some more complex ones. I've got some more complex ideas. The first wave of Paddock upgrades in the original game, they worked great, and there was room to expand on that mechanic a bit. So that's what's being tinkered with now. And we'll get some more complex ones. These are also kind of, I wanted to spread these out between, you know, different eras, getting Jurassic Park and Jurassic World eras, and kind of show some iconic things like the fences, the Explorer Tours, the Aviary, the Gyrosphere, and the iconic things tend to be on the simpler side as well. So if this video seemed a little simpler in terms of card effects compared to some of the previous ones, that's a little bit why. We'll probably come back and visit some more Paddock upgrades at some point. I'm not really sure what the release schedule looks like at this point. I've been much busier this spring than I had hoped, so that might be slipping back a little bit. I've missed some of these preview videos too, you might have noticed. And that's because of that. I'm targeting graduation this summer for my PhD, so I'm busy, very busy. But yeah, we'll leave this one here. I think that's a pretty good overview of what some of the Paddock upgrades are like in the game.